Okay, let's begin. Our first speaker today is Professor Morton Horwitz of the Harvard Law School, where he is Charles Warren Professor of American Legal History. His first book, The Transformation of American Law, 1780 to 1860, was published in 1977, and it is widely regarded as one of the most important, if not the most important book in modern American legal historiography. And I have to say that's true because I read it as an undergraduate, and so it must be important. I read it as an undergraduate. And his title of his paper today is Jewish Legal Realists. Take it away.
Thanks. So I think we have a million. Depends how you count, however. I would like to discuss the influence of Jews on the development of American legal realism. Legal realism should be defined expansively to include not only the critical jurisprudence of the interwar years, but also the progressive or sociological jurisprudence of the pre-World War I period. Jews were among the prominent proponents of this critical jurisprudence. In the earlier group were Brandeis and Cardozo, Nathan Isaacs, and Harold Lasky. Spanning both periods are Morris Cohn and Felix Frankfurter. In the later period, we need to include Jerome Frank and Felix Cohn. The Encyclopedia of the Social Sciences, published between 1931 and 1935, contained articles by perhaps 24 realists, including Isaacs and Lasky and Morris and Felix Cohn. Other Jews who might be called realists who published in the encyclopedia were Ernst Freund, Sheldon Gluck, Max Lerner, and Max Radin. Some legal realists turned to value-free social science and, in the words of Carl Llewellyn, wished to temporarily postpone the question of values. They saw realism, again in Llewellyn's words, as a technology or methodology having no connection to moral or political questions. Other realists, including all of the Jews on the list, when I originally wrote this, I said except perhaps Sheldon Gluck, who is a more complicated story, not for today, were critical of the turn, these realists were critical of the turn to value-free social science and saw the move as endangering the critical perspective that realism had produced. The critical perspective on law was derived from progressive politics, and in particular from Pound's statement that the law in books had lost touch with law in action. Progressives believed that the connection of law to social justice had been severed by the enormous social dislocations produced by industrialization and corporate concentration. They felt that the Lochner Court and its system of classical legal thought was oblivious to the emergence of European-style class struggle. I wish to argue that the critical strand of realism advanced by those realists who did not succumb to value-free social science was the first and most prominent example in America of what Peter Novick has called cognitive relativism, of the view that categories of thought and frames of reference were socially and historically contingent. In law, cognitive relativism was devoted to undermining the claim of late 19th century classical legal thought that legal categories were neutral, natural, and necessary, and that it was possible to have an objective system of legal reasoning that could sharply both Felix Cohn's denunciation of the heaven of legal concepts as transcendental nonsense and Jerome Frank's Freudian effort to link the formalism and essentialism of legal realism to the psychology of religious fundamentalism were prominent examples of cognitive relativism. This critical strand of realism blended into the emerging sociology of knowledge, which itself is one of the forerunners of modern interpretivist and hermeneutic theories of knowledge. In Europe and America, Jews were prominent in advancing and elaborating theories that Peter Berger has labeled the social construction of reality. Legal realism was the earliest version of this movement in America. What was the relationship between critical realism and the experience of post-emancipation Jewish intellectuals? In Western Europe, cognitive relativism emerged among secular Jews during the late 19th century as a reaction to their failed universalist and assimilationist hopes after the French Revolution. With the upsurge of nationalism and anti-Semitism, the Jews of Freud's, Herzl's, and Wittgenstein's Vienna devoted themselves to demonstrating the gap between appearance and reality and to emphasizing the false promise of social homogeneity contained in elaborating universal social theories that submerged the particular in the general. Writing in the aftermath of the Dreyfus Affair, Emil Durkheim also reacted against Enlightenment universalism and rationalism by emphasizing particularism, conventional or customary group or guild norms as a source of value that might restrain the reign of unmitigated greed and self-interest. Through their emphasis on the transparency of culture and the contingency of social consciousness, the great Jewish social theorists of the turn of the century joined Kafka, Proust, and Sartre as the prophets of cultural modernism. In the same year, 1881, as Vienna elected an anti-Semitic mayor, the pogroms that followed the assassination of the Tsar also catapulted the Jews of the East into modernity. In Irving Howe's words, they discovered history in place of those timeless religious truths that had been the basis of shtetl Jewish culture. The development of Zionist theory over the next generation, though it protested against Enlightenment universalism, was deeply rooted not only in the historicism of Hegel and Marx, but also in the modernist view that human nature is socially constructed. The wish to transform the degraded Jew of the shtetl by creating a new society in which Jewish alienation and the division of the Jewish soul into public and private realms could be overcome. For the first time in 2,000 years, Zionists projected a secular vision of cultural wholeness by means of elimination of Jewish estrangement that would permit Jews finally to determine their own destinies. In both West and East at the turn of the century, the failures of emancipation led Jews to emphasize the differences between appearance and reality, between thought and action. Jews became expert at seeing through ideologies to reveal their real or latent content, at seeing through institutions to see how they really worked, at revealing the conventional nature of manners and the hidden force behind sexual mores or market capitalism. In Europe, at least, cognitive relativism should not be associated with assimilation, but with its failure. Not with opportunism and apology, but with resistance to and criticism of the existing order. No one better captured this strand of Jewish culture than the non-Jewish institutional economist and sociologist Thorstein Veblen. In his essay, The Intellectual Preeminence of Jews in Modern Europe, written in the immediate glow of the Balfour Declaration, Veblen linked Jewish achievement with Jewish estrangement. Among all of the clamorous projects of national self-determination which surround the return of peace, Veblen began, the proposal of the Zionists is notable for sobriety, goodwill, and a pose of self-insurance. More confidently and perspicuously than all others, the Zionists propose a rehabilitation of their national integrity under a regime of live and let live. Yet it is always a project for withdrawal upon themselves, a scheme of national demarcation between Jew and Gentile. Indeed, it is a scheme of territorial demarcation and national frontiers of the conventional sort, within which Jews and Jewish traits, traditions, and aspirations are to find scope and breathing space for a homebred culture and a free unfolding of all that is best and most characteristic in the endowment of the race. There runs through it all a dominant bias of isolation and inbreeding and a confident persuasion that this isolation and inbreeding will bring great and good results for all concerned. The Zionists aspired to bring to full fruition all that massive endowment of spiritual and intellectual capacities of which their people have given evidence throughout their troubled history.